We already had an introduction. So yes, as Mary mentioned, I'm the chairperson of the Java community process. You may not have realized that I've actually been working with the Java community for 2 decades now. I joined Sun back in 2000, so a little over 2 decades. So I've seen the Java community through many different changes. And like we talked about in the beginning, I'm from California, originally from Southern California. So I enjoy being outdoors as much as possible. But I do recall being in Chicago a few times. And actually, we did some hack days many years ago, back around the Java 9 timeframe. So I know Mary talked about volunteer opportunities in her introduction. So I'm going to give you lots of suggestions for those. So my presentation has 3 parts. And the first part is something that you may know as a Java developer, being that you're in the Chicago Java user group, a little bit about how Java is developed through the JCP. And secondly, I'll go through and share with you some of the latest updates to the Java platform itself. And then finally, ideas on how to participate. So since you are a Java developer, I like to let you know first off that Java continues to be the #1 programming language since it was launched over 25 years ago now. It's grown to over 12 million developers all over the world, and the focus on the platform itself has been run through the gamut of all different types of devices, but currently the focus is on making Java the ideal platform for the cloud and measuring JVMs connected to the cloud. So deploying Java applications to cloud environments. But what hasn't changed are the philosophies and how we evolve Java and the things that we keep in mind. Those are the consistent things, and I believe these are the things that have contributed to Java's success and made it the #1 programming language all over the world. While there's lots of different technologies that developers use, and that is something new that you used to see. You could just stick with one language or technology and say you are that kind of developer. Now, most developers will develop using multiple tools, but Java continues to be the most successful and popular language with developers and with customers. And also, I should have noted in my previous slide, the research I've done from employer surveys, the most highly paid technical skill. And the things that remain consistent is how we evolve the platform, and that we ensure that it's try to ensure that it's complete, but at the same time bringing in innovations and modern features, balancing that with quality and security and ensuring compatibility of the platform. But one of the things that's really unique about the way Java is developed is that we actively nurture a ecosystem of involvement and developer participation. And we essentially do that through the JCP. And we've done that for over 25 years now. We're going to continue to celebrate the 25-year anniversary, even though we're in 2021 now. We do that virtually until we all see each other again. And the role that the JCP plays is significant in terms of ensuring that we have the participation from the entire community and we bring in a balanced viewpoint, but also ensuring compatibility. So this is an organization chart of what the JCP looks like. So essentially, everything in the Java X namespace is overseen by the JCP. So the Java platform is developed through JSRs, overseen through the JCP program as an organization, and obviously with other open source projects having a major and significant role to play, which I'll get into later. But I serve as the chairperson. I chair the executive committee. I have a small staff that helps me in that effort, but the main heavy lifting of developing and evolving Java is done by the members, by Java developers just like you. And the projects are all led by specification leads, and those specification leads are responsible for forming an expert group and collecting contributors, and then also soliciting feedback from our broader JCP membership base, but not only our membership base, Java developers all over the world who are using the technology. And the way we organize the projects, so the way Java is evolved is through, we call our projects Java Specification Requests, or JSRs. Oftentimes developers will have heard that term JSR, but they don't necessarily realize that if you're working on a JSR, it's been developed through the JCP program, and it's gone through this process that I'm going to explain to you in the next 5 minutes before I move on to some of the technology features that have gone into the platform of late. So JSRs are led by a community member. That's the spec lead that I showed to you on the chart, and also with the assistance of their expert groups and contributors, JCP members can submit and lead JSRs. And JSRs are, even though it's called a Java specification request, it's actually made up of 3 things. So every JSR that's been developed through the JCP has to deliver not only that specification, but the code, which we call the reference implementation, and a test suite, or a TCK. So these 3 things work together, and they're developed before any JSR can be implemented in production code. So you have a specification, which is full and complete, and then you have a reference implementation. That's the code showing you can build an implementation. And then the other key part here is the TCK. So that enables us to test the reference implementation against the TCK, the test suite, and ensure that it complies with the specification. The other key thing about this is really what enables so much choice and a rich and robust ecosystem. So this enables multiple independent compatible implementations. So that means that community members can take the specification, develop their own implementation, run it against the TCK, and that's what enables the choice that not only you as developers get to enjoy, but also customers. So these 3 things work together. The spec license includes strong compatibility requirements, and then we have the multiple implementations for choice. And every project goes through the same cycle, and it also has votes by the executive committee. So that's the primary role of the JCP Executive Committee that I showed in the organization chart. It's like a board of directors, but the primary role is to review and vote on JSRs, or specifications, and also to serve on expert groups and to help guide the evolution of the program through an international effort. So I'm really pleased to say that we continue to see participants from all over the world assisting and contributing to this effort. I keep a running list of my talks for the year. So even though I haven't traveled in the last 12 months, my last trip was in February, I looked at the balance of events that I've done over the last 12 months, and I've been able to meet with developers all over the world, even though we're meeting virtually right now. And when I looked at our membership, which I do every January, I also see an even balance in terms of who are our members, who's contributing and participating. And not only is it balanced geographically, but if you look at who's participating, not only is it corporations or vendors using Java, but also nonprofit groups and open source groups and Java user groups like the Chicago Java User Group. But the primary majority of our members are actually individual developers. So developers who are passionate about the technology that they're using and want to be able to contribute and participate in a meaningful way to how the technology is evolved. And the primary reason why individuals do this in my informal qualitative survey really came down to these 2 different categories that I'm showing you a couple of examples here. So 1, positive impact on your career, being seen as a leader and someone to go to both within your local community and the broader global community. And then that falls into the 2nd category. So it's like being a Java citizen, right? So you have your citizenship rights, which include voting every year for the JCP Executive Committee members. So we just finished up our elections. We have these elections every year for the Executive Committee. Just to put some faces with what's an Executive Committee, this is actually our last face-to-face meeting, which was held back in October of 2019, but we continue to meet virtually. This was our meeting when we met at the Twitter headquarters. And the really nice thing about having our elections built in is we continue to see that balance in the executive committee as well. So we have 18 members on the executive committee. Obviously, more than one representative can come to the meetings because we have more than 18 people there, but we have corporations, nonprofits, Java user groups, and individual developers also represented on the executive committee. And we continue to maintain that evolving Java through the JCP gives us the best of both worlds. It's developed as a standard, and it's developed in open source. So it's not one or the other, but both. It's an open standard developed via open source. And I talked about how I would share how other projects relate to the JCP. So the open source implementation of the Java platform that's developed through the JCP is OpenJDK is the place where the reference implementation for Java SE is developed. And of course, within OpenJDK, the project's organized in JEPs. So we have both JEPs and JSRs. So similar acronym. So within OpenJDK, there are Java enhancement proposals, JEPs, and then a collection of JEPs will be collected into a JSR for the Java SE platform. And that means that the JEPs are developed within OpenJDK, and then those are fed up into a JSR, which is approved by the executive committee. And then it is available for use by the Java developer community in their projects and development code, production code that can be put into products and used in customer solutions. So currently, the last major release of Java is Java 15. Back in 2017, which I think is the last time I actually visited you in Chicago, we had Java 9, which introduced modularity to the Java platform, and that enabled us to move to a faster release cadence. So that means that what we have with Java now is a release every 6 months. And around that same time, starting with Java 9, we also introduced into the Java ecosystem this concept of long-term support release. So that means that while we have a release every 6 months, well, every 3 years that one of those releases will be designated as a long-term support release. So the last release that's a long-term support release is Java 11, and the next one will be Java 17, which will be released later this year. And then the third thing that was different and started the progression back with Java 9 was introducing new features into OpenJDK coming from Oracle's JDK. So that helped to accelerate the innovation. Like I talked about the philosophies of Java, we want to have innovations coming into the platform, and that was followed through the same process via OpenJDK, creating JEPs. So these were a lot of changes back around this time of 2017 that the community has seen through. And I go through just a small progression to show you the differences and how Java is evolved now while still, having those philosophies kept in mind. So with Java 9, I talked about modularity. But there were actually, in addition to modularity, over 100 other features that went into Java 9. And that was pretty typical for a Java release since the time that Java was introduced back in the 90s, that you would have many features that were introduced into each version of the platform. And what we would do is we would select one major feature, and then we would wait until that feature was finished until we would release the platform. And that would typically take 3 to 4 years. And that's why you saw such a huge collection of features going into each release of Java, which could be problematic in terms of it's not very predictable, and then also oftentimes a lot of those features would get forgotten about underneath the major feature that you were waiting for with that release. So we moved to that faster release cadence for a few reasons, to make it more predictable, reliable, to help accelerate innovations coming into the platform on a more regular basis, and also get on that faster release cadence that really, like I talked about in the beginning, when you're seeing developers use multiple technologies technologies and tools, most technologies are on a faster release cadence. So that puts us more in keeping with the rest of the schedule and also makes it digestible in terms of moving in between releases, which I know you're going to have a talk later this year talking about migrating between releases. So with a smaller, more digestible release, it makes it easier to migrate in between versions once you get past Java 9. It makes it much easier to move in between releases without having to have a project that would take multiple months for a Java migration move in between platform versions. So starting with JDK 10, we had that every 6 months. And what you saw was 6 months later, new features coming into the Java platform. It makes it a little bit easier. You can see here I have a snapshot of the features that went into Java 10. This is probably on average 10 to 15 features going into each version of the platform now on a predictable schedule. So for instance, with Java 10, under the features, you can see what went in there. For instance, I would say the most popular one here was the var keyword, local variable type inference. And then 6 months later, JDK 11, so that was a long-term support release. It had more features, and that goes back to what I talked about. Some of the features from the Oracle JDK actually made it into JDK 11. So those features were ready. The way the new release model works is that whatever JEPs are ready to be targeted in that time frame of the 6-month release cadence, whatever technologies are ready to go, they're targeted for that platform release and integrated into the mainline. So it just so happened that many of those features like Flight Recorder and Java Mission Control and ZGC made it into JDK 11. And then we continue with that progression every 6 months. I know there was some uncertainty in the community whether that was going to happen, but it continues to happen. And another thing that we saw around this time back in 2019 with JDK 12 was this idea of preview features. So you may have noticed these. For instance, you can see with JDK 12, we had switch expressions. So a project coming out of Project Amber, introducing new language features. So it's a preview feature, which means it's fully spec'd and implemented, but it's not turned on. That means that you can go in and turn it on and use it. And we're looking to collect more feedback from the community in terms of how you're using that feature. And you can also see we had a contribution there from Red Hat, Shenandoah, an experimental feature, garbage collector. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed too when we move to this faster release cadence is you actually see more contributions from different community members working within the Java developer community. And I think that's a matter of fact that rather than having to wait 4 years for a contribution that you're going to make to the platform, you're going to see it be actually tangible results and payoff within the 6-month time period when you make that contribution. You see it integrated into the platform. So JDK 13, a little bit smaller release, but you can see also in the features, another preview feature coming here, text blocks, which is exciting, and switch expression continued to be a preview feature with JDK 13. And in 2020, following along with the 6-month release cadence, JDK 14, which had 15 Java enhancement proposals. And our current release back in September 2020, JDK 15, and you can see that some of those preview features had made it to be regular features like text blocks. You also see Project ZGC, that's a feature included now, scalable low latency garbage collector, and then some other second previews like pattern matching, which are cool to see. So JDK 15, if you want to use code in production, the most current release, if you go to jdk.java.net, 15 is the release that's approved. going through the JCP now is JSR 391, has a big collection of JEPs going into it. It's planned to be released in March, just a couple of months. And also of note in this one is the plan to be complete the migration to GitHub and from migrating from Mercurial to Git. So that's a change. Also, you can see we have records in there planned to be a standard feature as part of the JDK. And we're already working on JDK 17. So while there's not wiki page with a collection of targeted features yet, that will be up there soon, and early access builds are available now. So I talked about some of the things that you can do. That's one of the things that you can do now to get ready for the next release, and also something you can do to make an impact and contribute in the Java community is download those early access builds. So every 2 weeks, early access builds come out, and I'll go into a screenshot a little bit later in my presentation where I show you what that looks like and what you can do with the early access builds. But currently, we have early access builds out for JDK 16 as well as early access builds for JDK 17. And like I mentioned, we still continue to have in OpenJDK the projects. So these are the named projects that you would typically used to see. We would pick one project, and that would be the target for the next feature for the Java platform, and we would wait until that project feature was complete, and then we would ship the next version of the Java platform. We don't do it that way anymore. Like I mentioned, it's a train release, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the projects. We still continue to have those, and the way it works is that as things are ready within those projects, they're put into JEPs, Java Enhancement Proposals, and then targeted for inclusion in a platform release. And so that means that you would see little parts of these projects come out as they're ready. So like, for instance, the one probably seeing the most things come out of it is Project Amber. But I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on each of these projects and also show you where they map to in terms of what are the priorities and what can you expect in the future in the Java platform. Security will continue to be the #1 priority for the Java platform, but also we are making investments in improving developer productivity and in continuing to ensure compatibility, looking at how we can increase density, and with Project Valhalla, improving startup time. Project Layton is actually a new project that's looking at that, improving predictability and simplifying serviceability and profiling. So for instance, with Java Flight Recorder and Java Mission Control that went into Java 11. So Project Valhalla is one that a lot of developers get excited about, introducing value types to the Java platform and looking at optimizing code. And this project has its own wiki page on OpenJDK as well as its own project-specific builds. Also, we have Project Portola. So I talked about having Java remain the first choice for deployments in the cloud. Project Portola looks at making Java an ideal environment for container deployments. And I mentioned Project ZGC, a scalable low-latency garbage collector that's included starting with JDK 11, but improvements continue to be made with Project ZGC. And Project Panama looks at replacing JNI and having Java operate in improved a way more natively, and looking at use cases around machine learning, artificial intelligence, and big data. So Java has a big opportunity there, and within Project Panama, looking at improvements for the language that would make it run in a more efficient way in a native environment. And Project Loom, which looks at making a major update to the concurrency model in Java, which we haven't seen in a while. And this project also has its own wiki, mailing list, and project-specific builds that you can take a look at. This project has the big idea of enabling millions of fibers to be spawned into a single JVM instance. So there's also lots of talks that can go into a little bit more detail about that one. And like I mentioned earlier, Project Amber is a collection of small language improvements. So this is where you've seen the things that I highlighted coming into the Java platform, things like switch expressions, pattern matching, and records. So if you go to jdk.java.net, that's where you can find the last release of Java. So the release that's ready for use now, that's JDK 15. And you can also find some of the project-specific builds. So like a project-specific build for Loom or Panama or Valhalla, for instance. And another good way to follow along the news is to follow OpenJDK on Twitter. That's another place where they'll let you know that there's an early access build available. You also can join and contribute to OpenJDK by signing the OpenJDK contributor agreement if you wanted to make actual code contributions to OpenJDK. So a lot of these changes that have happened are, as I mentioned, they're overseen by the JCP, and we have had to evolve our process over time. So the next section I'm going to share is a little bit about some of the changes we've enabled to make this happen, and then I'll go right into some of my suggestions for how to contribute. And this is where you can really make a difference by being a volunteer within your Java user group. So one of the main roles of the executive committee in the JCP is to modify the rules of how the JCP works, and we call that changing the constitution. So some of the major things that we've done over this time period that I just highlighted was ensure that everything is transparent. So all of the downloads I mentioned are available for you, whether you're a member of the JCP or a contributor in OpenJDK or not. So that means that you can download these drafts as they're available. You can view the issue trackers, you can view the mailing lists, and you can comment on them, provide your feedback. We also looked at resizing the executive committee. That was a thing that we just finished last year. So merging the executive committees and resizing them to the size they are now of 18 members focused on the Java SE platform itself. And then looking at how we can ensure that we can move fast enough to have that 6-month release cadence, and also ensure that we have broad participation from all the different constituencies within the Java development. So, sorry. Broadening our membership. We looked at how we could eliminate any barriers. So that means that we looked at things that were prohibiting people from becoming members and participating in the process. And that included eliminating all the membership fees, making everything accessible via electronic signature, and then also looking at enabling individuals to join without encumbrance. So what that ended up looking like was, rather than one size fits all membership that we used to have in the JCP, we have 3 different membership levels. So we have that membership level for individuals. That means that individuals can join as associate members and be contributors without having to get their employer's signature. And then we enabled the Java user group membership, which we call a partner member, and then we continue to have the full members. So that is primarily for companies, but also enabling individuals such as professors or consultants to be able to join as full members. And then we streamlined the development cycle of how JSRs were developed. When we first introduced the JCP, we were really using more of a waterfall cycle of development, and Java wasn't yet being developed in open source. So what we did, really motivated by that faster release cadence, was look at how we can release a JSR and have it go through the life cycle of the JCP and faster, but also balancing, still having that checks and balances with the executive committee and a vote, and then also, of course, the freeze of the code to ensure that we have approvals to use all the IPR and that the code is safe to use for development and deployments. So we'll continue to evolve the JCP, and if you want to follow, if that is of interest to you, what things we talk about within the executive committee, that's all open and available to the public as well on jcp.org. Also within the executive committee, we started this effort around the 25-year anniversary of Java, where we looked at Java in education as a use case. So how can we bring Java to the next generation of developers? And this is also something where we developed an initiative to help Java user groups and Java user group leaders support us in this initiative to bring Java to that next generation of developers in your local communities. So one of the things that you can do within your Java user group is host a workshop for junior developers. We're putting together some tools and presentation templates to help you to reach out to your universities or to secondary school students and help them learn about Java. So we have a couple of presentations available there now on jcp.org, the Java in Education Initiative, and we're going to have more resources available soon. This is one of the things that I'll talk about that Mary mentioned next month in the JUG Summit prior to DevNexus. So get more Java user group leaders involved in this initiative and using and leveraging the tools that are available and out there to make it easy to invigorate your user group with that younger next generation of Java developers. So also we're partnered with Oracle University to get the training and certifications update. The most current up-to-date one would be Java 11. So that's the certification that you can developers can currently get up to Java SE 11, which that's really important in some areas of the world. And then also, I think the really cool thing is this free training that Oracle University started offering in the last 6 months called the Java Explorer course, which is really designed for junior developers who haven't learned Java yet. So the core concepts of Java, and that's available for free. And then, of course, partnering with Oracle Academy, which is a completely free resource for educational institutions and nonprofits. But also there's some tools there if you wanted to learn how to teach a workshop on Java. So for instance, like the Java Fundamentals course, which is really targeted at university level students, but also can be taught to secondary school students who have learned some of the basics of programming. So the result of these changes that we've implemented and really the thing that we've tried to do with the JCP is make it more open than it was before. And what we continue to maintain is that working together, we can achieve more, both within the JCP, but also you within your Java user groups. So that brings me to my final portion of my talk, which is how will you contribute and how will you participate? What we used to see was that oftentimes developers would try to do this on their own, looking through all these specifications and documents and downloading the early access builds. But what we found was that it's a better experience for developers, as well as the feedback that we get and return is more valuable if developers are working together as part of a team, either through their Java user group or with their employer, helping each other, teaching each other, and working together. That's actually the last time I was in Chicago when we did a hack day around Java 9 with the Chicago Java user group. And that list of Java user groups who are working in conjunction with us on these efforts has grown to over 100 different Java user groups all over the world. And that not only helps to drive adoption of the technology within the local communities, we have almost 400 different Java user groups all over the world, but it helps to give visibility to the user groups that participate in those efforts, because I enjoy highlighting success stories of Java user groups whenever I give my talks to companies as well as at conferences and other Java user group meetups. So that brings me to my 5-step process for success in contributions. The first thing you need to do is pick a project. So you probably got the idea with everything I've shared. There's many different choices in the Java ecosystem, and really these 5 steps apply to anything that you want to do. Pick the project you want to work on. So whether that's downloading early access builds of OpenJDK, right now that would be 16 or 17, leading a Java in Education workshop, or picking one of the standalone JSRs or the platform JSR that's being developed through the JCP. The first thing you need to do is decide on your own or together with your teammates, either your employer or your Java user group, what is it that you want to work on? What is your area of interest? So it could be one of those projects that I highlighted of things that are new features and functionality that's going to come to the platform later, like Project Valhalla. So downloading the early access builds is probably one of the most applicable ways to get involved because you can test your applications against the code in development, and then you can give feedback before the release goes out to the public. And then a secondary thing that you can do is join the quality outreach program. If you do the early access builds, what you're going to find is a page like this. When you go to jdk.java.net and you click on the JDK 16, you'll find release notes, you'll find changes that have been incorporated into that build. Like I said, they come out about every 2 weeks. Also issues that were addressed in that build, and then all your different downloads. And then a good place to provide your comments once you collect your feedback of what happens when you download the build and run it against your application is provide comments into the adoption group. So OpenJDK has an adoption group which is designed to collect feedback, and people who are monitoring the adoption group often will be able to help direct you to what projects to share it in. That's another reason to do it as a team, is sometimes you're not sure where to put your feedback. And then the quality outreach group, which a lot of folks haven't heard of, is also a group within OpenJDK, and it's a collection of over 100 different free and open source projects that are dependent on Java. So when you go through and download the early access builds and test your applications, you may find you have some dependencies that aren't ready yet in that release. So one motivating factor would be if you go to the quality outreach wiki and find that project, you can actually contribute and help fix bugs with these projects to help get them up to speed, because obviously all these different projects that are dependent on Java also have to move now to this faster release cadence of being ready for the next release every 6 months. And with the help of the community, this is actually working really smoothly. I think the quality outreach group is a great resource, and I just highlighted a couple of projects on this slide that have had some great contributions from community members and have put some nice issues forward in terms of newcomers who want to contribute to open source projects, bugs that you can fix if you wanted to get involved, and that's Apache Maven and Eclipse collections. So this is a great way to get involved in an open source project, and also may help you move to the next version of Java. So go to the wiki table in the quality outreach group and you'll find a matrix that looks like this with links to the project leaders, as well as sometimes some issues that need to be fixed. And then if you decide you want to work on a JSR, every JSR has a page that looks just like this. This is where on jcp.org you'll find the latest drafts, as well as links to the public communications, so that's the mailing list, and then the issue tracker. So that's the first step, pick something. Second step, communicate. So like I talked about, everything being open and transparent. That's only useful if it's used as a two-way street. So what we see most often is people are consuming this information, but if you decide you want to contribute and get involved in these projects, you should introduce yourself and communicate with the project leads or on the project mailing list. And that's a really key step to do next. So introduce yourself, where you're from, what you're interested in, and then any ideas that you have in terms of what your contributions might look like. And you might not know what you want to contribute, and that's also a great time and place to communicate that. And so together decide on what actions you're going to take and then follow up on those actions. So since we started some of these efforts to bring in more broad participation, these I would say are the top ways and contributions that have been the most successful and the most rewarding for developers who are doing it. So in the early stages, sharing ideas on features and feedback, commenting on those new features is helpful. Reading early versions of the specs and the Java docs is really key. That's probably the least favorite thing of developers to do, but that's something that project leads would love to have, is more feedback on the specifications on the Java docs, even if it was only one part of the specification. You don't need to read through the entire specification. You could pick one part that's applicable to you and your application and provide feedback on it before it's final. And downloading the early access builds and the reference implementation, really important and helpful. For new standalone optional packages for Java SE, sample applications are useful. That's been done by Java user group contributions. Translations, if you speak another language, are always useful. And even just socializing the technology as it's being developed can help to spread the word in social media. So follow the discussions and comment on the issue trackers as you're doing these actions. So for instance, say you decided to download the early access build and you had some feedback, make sure you share that feedback in the appropriate issue tracker or mailing discussion. And the final step and key to note is that as you're doing this, you're going to be having fun. So organize a virtual event or in person if we're able to do that later this year. Oftentimes when conferences are going on, we'll even have some worldwide hack days where we get together with people from different user groups from all over the world. This is a picture from Code 1. I guess it was 2019, the last one in San Francisco. And I show this picture also because a hack day doesn't have to be huge. So it can be some of the most successful hack days or events are 5 developers getting together and working on a project and discussing their feedback before sharing it with the project leads. So when you do these activities, you're going to find that you're not only enhancing your knowledge and your skills, but you're exponentially building your network and making connections both in your local community, at your employer, and in the global Java community as well. So in order to continue to see Java be the #1 programming language and be successful decades into the future, we do need you to help us continue to make Java the best language in the world. So you can find and follow more news on what I just shared with you on jcp.org or on our Twitter account, jcp_org, or my personal Twitter, which is HeatherVC. We just had our public EC meeting in December. The recording's available on jcp.org. That's where a lot of the EC members share what their priorities are for the coming year. And we'll have another public meeting in June if you want to hear some of the latest things that are happening within the executive committee and some of the discussions that we are having. So that brings us to the end of my formal comments, and Mary can help to facilitate any comments or questions or suggestions, or we can do this, like you said, Mary, after the fact. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Heather. It's really very nice presentation, very comprehensive, a lot of great information and